Rome, the Eternal City, was the center of one of history's biggest, longest-lasting, and most influential empires. Nowadays, Rome may just be a spot for tourists to eat spaghetti and enjoy the pretty builds. But about 2,000 years ago, it had conquered the Mediterranean world. Rome wasn't built in a day, but luckily, this video isn't a whole day long. I'm cramming centuries of Roman history into one Minecraft video. Let's go. Rome's story begins with a mythical tale. Two brothers, Romulus and Remus, were abandoned as infants and raised by wolves. According to legend, they were the descendants of the Trojan hero Aeneas, whose people became refugees and escaped to Italy after Troy was destroyed. When Romulus and Remus grew up, they wanted to establish their own city along the Tiber River, but they couldn't agree on where to build it exactly. See, Romulus wanted to build the city on this hill, while Remus wanted to build it on that hill. So, as good brothers do when they disagree, Romulus killed Remus and named the city after himself. That's why it's called Rome.
Oh my God!
To populate his new kingdom, Romulus welcomed outcasts, criminals, or anyone who needed a fresh start. This led to Rome's population growing fast, but there was a catch. The city was basically just a boys' club, not exactly the recipe for a lasting civilization. So, Romulus came up with a naughty plan. He invited the neighboring Sabines to a big party. Food, drinks, games. Sounded like a good time. But, in the middle of the party, the Romans suddenly kidnapped all the women and ran off with them. Wild times, am I right? Supposedly, the ladies eventually agreed to stay and ease tensions between their Sabine fathers and the Romans. So, I guess everything worked out. So now Rome is an established city. But it didn't look much like the marble palaces and temples it's known for today. Early Rome was basically just some huts on a few hills by the Tiber River. Over time, though, the city started to level up. A lot of that was thanks to the Etruscans, Rome's neighbors to the north. The Romans borrowed their architecture, gods, parts of their alphabet, and even the gladiatorial games. Basically, Rome's early years were them copying their cooler neighbors' homework. The young city also wanted to prove its might, so it picked fights with the nearby tribes and slowly expanded its territory. Life inside the city was simple. Firstly, the king was the big boss. Then there were the wealthy families, the patricians, and everyone else, the plebeians. Also, religion was everywhere. Sacrifices, omens, priests telling you whether today was a good day to go to war or not. The usual. All of this laid the foundation for what Rome would eventually become. The Roman kingdom didn't last forever, though. The last Roman king, Tarquin the Proud, was basically the final boss of bad rulers. He was arrogant, corrupt, and everyone hated him. The final straw came when Tarquin's son attacked a noblewoman named Lucretia, and when word got out, the people of Rome were mad. The Romans had enough of the corruption and cruelty of their kings, so they drove Tarquin out of the city and vowed to never have a king again. In place of a kingdom, Rome established a republic, a form of government where power is held by representatives instead of a single monarch. In Rome's case, the representatives were mostly old rich dudes from the patrician class, making the Roman Senate the ultimate old boys club. Some things never change. The Roman Republic was led by two elected consuls. Think of them as co-presidents that served for only 1 year, and each one could veto the other's decisions. Not exactly the most efficient system, but hey, it stopped anyone from having too much power again. Though, in times of crisis, a dictator with absolute power would be appointed to lead for a short term of 6 months or until the crisis was averted. I'm sure this system won't lead to any problems in the future. Most Romans, however, were just plebeians. Farmers, soldiers, and regular citizens with basically zero political power. So naturally, they were not happy with that. Over centuries, conflict between the plebeians and patricians led to the plebeians slowly getting more rights, such as being able to elect their own officials, called tribunes, who had veto power. Their job was literally to say, nah, that's unfair, when the Senate tried to screw over the common people. So, with their new republic set up, Rome didn't waste any time. They started picking more fights with their Italian neighbors and slowly expanding their territory. Things were looking up. Wait, What's that I hear? A force of tens of thousands of Gauls came marching on Rome in 390 BC. They sacked and burned the city, instilling a lasting fear of barbarian conquest in the Roman psyche. Anyway, back to business, said the Romans, and they went back to warring with the Italian tribes. Over the course of over a century, Rome's legions conquered the Sabines, Etruscans, Samnites, and the Greeks in southern Italy, led by the famous Pyrrhus of Epirus. By 272 BC, Rome had conquered all of Italy. With Italy under their control, Rome became a regional power, but they still weren't the biggest, baddest boys in town. That title belonged to the Carthaginians, a super rich trading empire based in North Africa. If Rome was tough and stubborn, Carthage was wealthy, sophisticated, and rocked the strongest navy in the Mediterranean. At first, Rome and Carthage signed trade deals, and acted friendly, but deep down they both knew this wasn't gonna last. Rivalry was inevitable. It all kicked off over Sicily. Rome wanted the island, Carthage wanted to keep it, and boom, the First Punic War had begun. The problem? Carthage had the best navy in the world, and Rome had no navy.
What the hell?
So, Rome did the most Roman thing possible. They copied Carthage's ships and strapped boarding ramps on them, allowing them to turn naval battles into land battles. After 20 brutal years, and losing more fleets at sea to storms than to the Carthaginians, Rome finally won. Carthage had to give up Sicily to the Romans. Sweet, Rome's first overseas territory. They grow up so fast. And with that, Rome wasn't just an Italian power anymore, they were now an empire in the making. But Carthage wasn't done. They might have lost Sicily, but they were seething for revenge. And one Carthaginian family would make it their life's mission to bring Rome to its knees. So Carthage was looking to get some revenge, and it wouldn't be long until the Second Punic War started. One young Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca, the son of Hamilcar Barca, who was a skilled general from the First Punic War, was especially vengeful. In 218 BC, Hannibal pulled off one of the craziest moves in military history. He marched an army with war elephants across the freezing Alps into northern Italy. Once he entered Italy, he straight up caused havoc. He won multiple devastating victories. At Cannae, his smaller force of 50,000 men completely surrounded and annihilated a much larger Roman force of 80,000 men with barely any losses of his own, destroying the biggest army Rome had ever fielded. This was Hannibal's masterpiece. This put Rome in freak-out mode. But Hannibal never could take the city of Rome itself. Instead, he just caused more havoc in Italy's countryside. But the Romans, stubborn as ever, never surrendered. Eventually, a Roman general named Scipio turned things around. He sailed straight to North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home. And in 202 BC, the two generals clashed at the Battle of Zama, and Hannibal, Rome's greatest nemesis, had finally been defeated. Rome had emerged victorious in the Second Punic War, while Carthage's status as a Mediterranean power was stripped away. But Carthage wasn't finished yet. 50 years later, the city started to recover, and that spooked the Romans. One Roman senator named Cato ended every speech with the line, wait, how do you pronounce that?
Carthago delenda est.
Oh, which means Carthage must be destroyed. So Rome went back to finish the job, and in 146 BC, Rome's legions leveled the city, and according to legend, they salted the earth so nothing could grow there again. Carthage was gone for good. With Carthage gone, Rome looked eastward towards the wealthy kingdoms in Greece and Asia Minor. One by one, these regions fell under Roman control. Rome had expanded like crazy after a century. Tons of land, slaves, and wealth poured in, but it all went to the elite. Small farmers couldn't compete with the mega estates, so their land was scooped up by the rich. The gap between rich and poor stretched like never before, causing tensions in Roman society. Cue the Gracchi brothers, two reformers who tried to help the poor by offering free grain and land reform, but they ended up getting assassinated. Meanwhile, a different issue was brewing. Gaius Marius, a successful general, revolutionized the Roman army. Instead of relying on the Senate to give him troops, he recruited poor Romans himself into his own standing army, providing them with equipment and promising them land when their service was done. Marius's soldiers weren't just loyal to Rome anymore, they were loyal to him. Future Roman generals would follow Marius' lead, making them much more influential in Roman politics. One of those powerful generals was Sulla. He was stripped of military command in a war against Pontus, but instead of accepting this, he marched his loyal army straight to Rome, kicking off a civil war. Sulla came out on top and declared himself dictator, and unleashed brutal purges against his political enemies. After a few years, he decided to calm down, and he retired and died peacefully. So I guess that's over. I'm sure no future generals will try to copy him, right? Enter Gaius Julius Caesar. With two other players, Pompey the Great and Crassus, they formed the first triumvirate, basically a three-man club where they promised to help each other gain political power. With their backing, Caesar won the consulship and set off to conquer Gaul. His campaigns were brilliant, but brutal. He killed around 1 million Gauls and enslaved another million. These conquests made Caesar mega rich and insanely popular, but more importantly, he now had a super loyal, battle-hardened army that answered not to the Senate, but to him personally. The Senate and Pompey grew nervous. They ordered Caesar to give up his command, but he said no, and in 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, essentially declaring war on the Roman Republic. Another brutal civil war erupted. Caesar battled Pompey for a couple years, eventually chasing him down to Egypt where Pompey was killed. With no one left to challenge him, Caesar declared himself dictator for life and pushed through many reforms. He even had time to create the Julian calendar, which laid the foundation for our modern Gregorian calendar. With all of his forceful reforms and appointments, Caesar was looking an awful lot like a king, and that was too much for many in Rome. So, on March 15th, 44 BC, a group of senators, including the famous Brutus, assassinated Julius Caesar during a Senate meeting. Phew, we finally put an end to Caesar's tyranny and saved the Republic, said the senators. They were not ready for what would come next. After Caesar's death, Rome fell into chaos once more. Two men stepped up to claim Caesar's legacy. Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general and a veteran of the Gallic Wars, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted son. At first, they teamed up and hunted down Caesar's assassins, but they soon turned on each other. Yet another civil war ensued, and after a major naval showdown at the Battle of Actium, Antony's fleet was crushed and he was defeated. Octavian was now the undisputed master of Rome and held absolute control. What power had once belonged to the Senate and people of Rome now belonged to him. He took a new title, Augustus, or Emperor. With that, the Republic had come to an end and the Roman Empire had begun. Augustus kept the old Senate around, but only as a formality. Real power now belonged to him, and under his rule, Rome entered its golden age, known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. For more than 2 centuries, the empire thrived in stability, prosperity, and expansion like never before. An interesting thing would also happen early in the empire's history. A Jesus of Nazareth appeared to be crucified in Jerusalem around 30 AD, which would result in the creation of a new monotheistic religion known as Christianity, but I'm sure this won't affect the Roman Empire in any way. Anyway, inside the empire, life flourished. Roman engineering was insane. They built roads across the empire stretching thousands of miles, aqueducts carrying fresh water into cities, and massive structures such as the Colosseum and the Pantheon. These fancy projects held the empire together, making Rome one of the most connected and advanced civilizations at the time. The Romans knew how to build stuff, but they also knew how to have some good old-fashioned FUN. In the Colosseum, gladiators fought with each other or wild animals to the death, entertaining massive crowds of tens of thousands of people. Bread and circuses, as the Romans called it, kept the people happy and distracted while the emperor ruled over them. Daily life in the empire was surprisingly comfortable for many. Roman cities had bustling markets, taverns, bathhouses, endless grain supplies, and large multi-story apartment buildings. Let's not get it twisted though. Rome was still an ancient civilization, so a lot of people were living in poor and unsanitary conditions, many died to common infections, and plagues could still ravage across the empire. But compared to the days of the Republic, life was more stable, secure, and connected. And while the core of the empire thrived, the legions kept pushing Rome's borders to their limits. They conquered Britain in the west, Dacia in the north, and stretched deep into Mesopotamia. Rome would reach its height in 117 AD under Emperor Trajan, and it would hold most of this territory for centuries. Rome seemed to be on top of the world, and everyone thought the empire could last forever. But things wouldn't stay perfect forever. In 180 AD, Marcus Aurelius, known as one of Rome's last good emperors, had died, bringing the Pax Romana to an end. His son Commodus would become the next emperor, and let's just say he turned out to be not so great. He preferred fighting in the gladiator arena for fun over actually governing, and he treated the empire's treasury like his own personal piggy bank. The Senate, army, and people hated him. Eventually, Commodus was assassinated, throwing Rome into chaos. Things would get really bad from here. Emperors came and went so fast it was like speedrunning the throne. Most of them were killed off by rivals or even their own bodyguards. Civil wars tore the empire apart while barbarian incursions slammed the frontier. This chaos led to the crisis of the 3rd century. The Roman Empire was in freefall. Within a period of 50 years, more than 20 emperors rose and fell, most of them being assassinated. Civil war raged non-stop, the economy crumbled, barbarian invasions pounded the borders, and the deadly plague of Cyprian tore through the population. During the crisis, the empire even split into 3, with 2 breakaway states, the Gallic Empire in the west and the Palmyrene Empire in the east. The Roman Empire is going to collapse. What will we do? And so came Aurelian. A successful general turned emperor took charge of Rome and he locked in. He defeated the Gallic and Palmyrene states, reunited the empire, and even built a new set of walls around Rome that still stand today. Aurelian had saved the empire, and he got assassinated. Can we please stop killing Roman emperors? After decades of chaos, Rome needed a reset. Enter Emperor Diocletian. He realized one man couldn't handle ruling such a massive territory anymore. So, in 293 AD, he split the empire into east and west, each with its own emperor and junior co-emperor. Diocletian also tried to stabilize the empire by making some reforms and reorganizing the army. And he also launched the biggest persecution of Christians Rome had ever seen, trying to wipe the new religion off the map. For a while, Diocletian's reforms brought order, but the system fell apart as soon as he retired. The emperors immediately started fighting each other for total control, and over time, one man would rise above the rest: Constantine. In 312 AD, Constantine faced off against his rival Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Before the battle started, Constantine supposedly saw a vision of a Christian symbol in the sky promising victory. Constantine ended up defeating Maxentius, and after beating some other rivals, he became the sole ruler of a reunited Roman Empire. Maybe because of his visions, Constantine converted to Christianity and issued the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, giving legal protection to Christians in the empire. He also built himself a new capital in the east, naming it after himself, Constantinople. This city would eventually outshine the old capital of Rome itself. Constantine gave the empire some hope, but things would quickly go back to decline. Waves of barbarian tribes were pushed west by the Huns, a nomadic group that were basically the ancestors of the famous Mongols who would conquer Asia 1,000 years later. Barbarian tribes such as the Goths and Vandals would begin invading Rome's borders, defeating multiple Roman armies and even killing an emperor. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked Rome itself, the first time the Eternal City had fallen in more than 800 years. In 455 AD, the Vandals conquered North Africa and sacked Rome again. By this point, there was nothing that could be done. The Western Empire was collapsing into pieces. Finally, in 476 AD, the last Roman emperor of the West, a child named, ironically, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic general named, how do you pronounce that? Odoacer? Odoacer? Well, however you say it, the Western Roman Empire was gone for good. The Western Roman Empire may have fallen, but the eastern half, with Constantinople as its capital, would survive for another 1,000 years. But in the west, the fall of Rome marked the end of the classical era and the beginning of the Middle Ages. Rome's legacy never disappeared though. From government and law, architecture, religion, our calendar, the names of the planets, and through today's Romance languages that are spoken around the world, Rome has had a massive influence in shaping the world that we live in today. This is definitely a new style for me, but I enjoyed making it, and hopefully you enjoyed watching. This is the part of the video where I tell you all the truly important stuff. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and also check out my Discord, Instagram, and also TikTok, where I post some other cool stuff. See you later, bruvs.